Hey guys, it's Miss Level here. Today we're going to be talking about the properties of shapes. Now, whenever you see any shape, you need to be asking yourself some questions about that shape. These questions can be like, how many sides does the shape have? How many angles does it have? Are all the sides the same length? Are opposite sides the same length? Do the angles make square corners? These are great questions that we need to be thinking about whenever we're trying to understand shapes and their properties. Before we get started, let's go over some important terms that we need to better understand. Okay guys, before we begin our lesson, let's look at these important terms and their definitions so we can better understand what we're working with in this lesson. The first word that we're going to look at is angle. An angle is one of the corners of a shape where two sides meet. This term is really important because whenever we're looking at shapes, the number of angles can determine what kind of shape it is. Let's move on to our next term. Our second term that we're going to be looking at is the word rectangle. A rectangle is a quadrilateral with four square corners and opposite sides are the same length. So a quadrilateral is any shape with four angles and four sides. So a rectangle falls into this category. It also has square corners, and not all of the sides are the same, but the opposite. So the top and the bottom are the same length, and the left and the right are the same length. Our third term is a rhombus. A rhombus is a parallelogram with four sides equal in length. So here's some background information. A parallelogram is a four-sided shape where the opposite sides are parallel to one another. That means that they never touch. So a rhombus has two pairs of parallel sides and all sides of the shape are equal in length. The next term that we need to understand is a pentagon. A pentagon is a two-dimensional closed shape with exactly 5 sides and 5 angles. So anytime you see a shape that has 5 sides and 5 angles, you can call that shape a pentagon. Our last term is a hexagon. A hexagon is a two-dimensional closed shape with exactly 6 sides and 6 angles. So whenever you see any shape with 6 sides and 6 angles, you can call that shape a hexagon. Now that we've gone over these important terms, let's go look at some shapes and see what different attributes they have. Okay guys, these are some shapes that we're going to be talking about and dealing with in today's lesson. These shapes, they might seem familiar to you, but I'm going to go into more depth about them. So the first shape that we have is a circle. A circle has no sides and no angles. Remember, an angle is when two sides meet. So because the circle has 0 sides, it also has 0 angles. The next shape that we're going to talk about is a rectangle. A rectangle has 4 sides and 4 angles. But there's something else that we need to look at whenever we're talking about a rectangle. First off, let's talk about the angles of a rectangle. In a rectangle, all of the angles have square corners. That means that you could fit a square into each corner. In addition to this, a rectangle doesn't have all of the sides the same length. The opposite sides of a rectangle are the same length. For example, the top of the rectangle is the same size as the bottom of a rectangle. The left and right sides of a rectangle are also the same size as each other. So even though a rectangle doesn't have all of the sides that are the same length, the opposite sides of a rectangle are the same length. Let's move on to the next shape, which is a rhombus. A rhombus also has 4 sides and 4 angles. Because both the rectangle and the rhombus have 4 sides and 4 angles, they both fall into the category of being a quadrilateral. A quadrilateral is a shape that has 4 sides and 4 angles. Now, let's compare the rectangle and the rhombus. A rectangle has square corners like we just talked about, but a rhombus does not. You can't make a square corner in the angle of a rhombus. Now, something else that's different between a rectangle and a rhombus, all of the sides of a rhombus are the exact same length. So the top and the bottom are the same length, and the sides are also the same length as the top and the bottom. The next shape that we're going to talk about is a triangle. A triangle has 3 sides and it has 3 angles. Now, I put 2 triangles on this slide to show you some differences. This triangle is called an equilateral triangle. That means that all of the sides are the same length on the triangle. Whereas this triangle is called an isosceles triangle. An isosceles triangle has 2 sides that are the same length. So these 2 sides are the same length on this triangle, but this bottom line or this bottom side does not share the same length. In order to be a triangle, it has to have 3 sides and 3 angles. But not every triangle looks the same. There can be triangles with right angles. There can be triangles that have no sides of the same length. They're all very different in their own way. The 5th shape that we're going to be talking about today is a hexagon. A hexagon has 6 sides and 6 angles. In this hexagon, all the sides are the exact same length. In addition to this, all of the angles are not right angles, so they do not have square corners. The last shape that we're going to be talking about today is a pentagon. A pentagon is a shape that has 5 sides and 5 angles. Some of these sides are the same length. For example, these 2 sides right here are the same length, and these sides are the same length. So remember, whenever you're looking at any of these shapes, look for these special things. How many sides do they have? How many angles do they have? Do they have square corners? Do they have sides that are the same length? These attributes are very important whenever we're looking at shapes. Now that we've gone over some different shapes and some important terms, let's get started on some questions. Okay guys, here's our first question. These questions are very similar to the ones that you might find in your Ready workbook. Let's get started. Which shapes belong to both of these groups? Has at least 1 square corner and no sides of the same length. So I'm going to highlight these attributes because I have to make sure that these shapes have these attributes or don't have these attributes. So it has to have at least 1 square corner in order for it to fit, and it has to have no sides that are the same length. Choose yes or no for each shape. So the way that I like to solve these types of problems is I like to take it one shape at a time. So whenever we're looking at the shape, we have to make sure it has at least 1 square corner and it has no sides the same length. The first shape that we see looks somewhat like a rhombus. I know that a rhombus has no square corners. I also know that a rhombus has sides of equal length. Because of this, I know that I'm going to have to mark no for this shape because it does not have a square corner and it has sides of the same length, so it does not belong to the group. Let's move on to the second shape. The second shape is a triangle, but if I look closely, this triangle has a square corner at the bottom. So it meets the first attribute for the group. It has one square corner, so I'm good to go so far. Now I need to see if it has no sides of the same length. When looking at this triangle, I can tell that the three sides do not share the same length. They're all different sizes. So because of this, I can mark yes for this shape because it has one square corner and it has no sides of the same length. Let's move on to our third shape. Our third shape is a little different. It has 5 sides and 5 angles. Let's see if there's a square corner. When looking at this shape, I can see that it has 2 square corners. This angle right here is a square corner, and this angle right here is a square corner. So I'm good on the first part of the group. Now I need to see if it has any of the sides that are the same length. When looking at this shape, I can tell that none of these sides are equal in length. So this shape, I'm also going to mark yes, because it meets all of the needs of the group. Let's move on to our last shape. Shape number 4 is a pentagon. In this pentagon, I can see that the bottom has 2 square corners. So it meets the needs of the first qualification of having at least one square corner. Now I need to see if it has sides the same length. When looking at this pentagon, I can see that this side and this side are the same length, as well as these top 2 sides are the same length. Because of this, it does not fall in the group. So I'm going to have to check no for this shape. Y'all did so great with this question. Let's move on to our last question for the lesson. All right, guys, our last question states, sort these shapes using the Venn diagram below. Now, you may have seen a Venn diagram whenever you're comparing and contrasting and reading, but you can also use this great tool in math. So, as you may know, a Venn diagram has 2 circles that overlap. In this circle, we're going to sort the shapes that are just quadrilaterals. In the second circle, we're going to sort the shapes that have at least one corner square. And in the middle, we're going to sort the shapes that have both of these attributes. So this shape would be a quadrilateral and it would have at least one corner square. Whenever we're sorting shapes, you need to look at each shape one at a time and see where this shape would fall. Would it be a quadrilateral? Would it be a shape that has at least one square corner? Or would it be both? Remember, in order for a shape to be a quadrilateral, it has to have 4 sides and it has to have 4 angles. In order for a shape to have a square corner, the sides have to meet at an angle, almost in an L shape, so they can have a square right there. So we need to be thinking about these 2 things whenever we're sorting our shapes. The first shape that we're going to talk about is a trapezoid. So let's think about a trapezoid. How many sides does a trapezoid have? 1, 2, 3, 4. How many angles does it have? 1, 2, 3, 4. So already I know a trapezoid meets the needs of a quadrilateral. It has 4 sides and 4 angles. Let's see if we can make a square corner in a trapezoid. When looking at my trapezoid, I'm unable to make a square corner in either of the angles. Because of this, I can't put the trapezoid in the center because it doesn't meet the needs of both circles. So I'm going to put my trapezoid over in the quadrilateral side of my Venn diagram. Great work. Let's move on to our next shape. Our next shape is a triangle. Let's see how many sides and angles a triangle has. 1, 2, 3 sides, and 1, 2, 3 angles. Because a triangle only has 3 sides and 3 angles, I can't call it a quadrilateral, so it won't be able to fit on this side of the Venn diagram. Let's see if I can find a square corner so it can go in this side of the Venn diagram. These 2 angles at the top and bottom do not make a square, but this bottom left-hand corner does make a square. So with that being said, I know that the triangle will go on the right side of my Venn diagram because it has at least 1 square corner. Fantastic work. Let's move on to our next shape. My third shape is a rectangle. A rectangle has 4 sides and 4 angles, so it can be called a quadrilateral. Let's see if I can find a square corner so it might be able to fit in the middle of my Venn diagram. When looking at my rectangle, I can see that it has 4 square corners. Because of this, I know that the rectangle meets the needs of both the quadrilateral and it has 1 square corner, so it's going to go in the middle of my Venn diagram. Let's move it now. Great work. Let's move on to our fourth shape. Our fourth shape is a shape that looks kind of like an arrowhead. Let's see how many sides and angles this shape has. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it has 4 sides. Let's see how many angles. 1, 2, 3, 4. So because this shape has 4 sides and 4 angles, I know it meets the needs of being a quadrilateral. Let's see if this shape has any square corners. Because this shape's angles did not make a square corner, I know that this shape is going to go over to the quadrilateral side of my Venn diagram. Let's move it now. Awesome job, guys. We have 3 more shapes left to sort. Our next shape is a rhombus. Let's see how many sides and angles a rhombus has. 1, 2, 3, 4 sides, and 1, 2, 3, 4 angles. Let's see if I can find a square corner for my rhombus. Because my rhombus does not have a square corner, I'm going to have to put this shape over in the quadrilateral side of my Venn diagram. Let's move that now. All right, guys, 2 more shapes to go. Let's move on to our next shape. The next shape that we see is a pentagon. Let's see how many sides a pentagon has. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's see how many angles a pentagon has. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So because a pentagon has 5 sides and 5 angles, I'm unable to put it in the quadrilateral side of my Venn diagram. Let's see if this shape has any square corners. The top angle does not have a square corner, as well as these 2 angles right here. But these bottom 2 angles do make a square corner. Because of this, I know that I can put this shape on the side of the Venn diagram that has at least 1 square corner. Let's move this shape now. All right, guys, 1 more shape to go, and then we're done sorting our shapes. Our last shape looks kind of like an L. Let's see how many sides and angles this shape has. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 angles. So because it has 6 sides and 6 angles, it will not fall on the quadrilateral side of my Venn diagram. Let's see if I can make a square corner out of any of these angles. I'm able to make a square corner at the very top, at the very bottom, and this angle is not a square angle, but in order for it to go on this side of the Venn diagram, it just needed one square corner. So I know that I can move this shape over to this side. Let's do that now. Fantastic job, guys. I hope that this sort and the other problem that we did helped you better understand the properties of shapes. I've had so much fun learning with you today. I'll see you next time.